Welcome back to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm Darren McBreen, and I'm joined now by Paul Craig Roberts. And he is the former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and the father of Reaganomics. And he says that Obama could use the debt crisis to seize total power. The president could very well declare a national emergency, blame the crisis on the Republicans, and pass an executive order which would give him dictatorial control in the name of preventing an economic collapse. And Paul Craig Roberts, welcome to the program. How are you?
Just fine, thanks. Glad to be with you.
We're talking about executive branch rule, Obama seizing power. Do you think Obama is getting ready to cross the Rubicon, so to speak?
No, I don't think that he's getting ready to do that, but I do think that is an alternative he has if there's no resolution of the debt ceiling limit or the shutdown before the Treasury runs out of money. Obama, if he can make it clear that the Republicans are responsible for forcing the issue, can simply use presidential directives that are already on the books, declare a national catastrophe, and assume a rule by himself. This is all on the books. He doesn't have to invent the presidential directive. Bush put it there. And so he can use it on the grounds that, well, if the Treasury runs out of money, we can't pay the military, so it impacts national defense. We can't pay the interest on the debt, so we default, the whole economy collapses, and that this certainly would be a national catastrophe. So he could certainly take that step. I don't necessarily think that this means he's planning for that or trying to maneuver the Republicans into it. But if they persist in refusing any kind of negotiation or accommodation, and he can blame it on them, then he could exercise these existing presidential directives and set aside Congress and the courts, raise the debt ceiling on his own, and continue ruling as long as he proclaimed a national catastrophe.
Yeah, because, the rules have changed. I know that, back in the Eisenhower administration, for example, they set up a way for, let's say, in the event of a nuclear attack, for example, they set up a directive that would allow continuity of the government in the aftermath of a nuclear attack. But now the rules have changed. Now we've got the Bush administration and the Obama administration. All they have to do is declare a national emergency for whatever reason they want, and they can get in there, and the executive branch can now seize total control. I'm right?
That's right. The original reason for these national emergencies was the continuity of government in the aftermath of nuclear attack. When I was a Treasury official, I had a role in that. I was supposed to, in the event of a nuclear attack, I was supposed to go to this hollowed out mountain in Virginia and be prepared to assume control of the government if no higher officials survived the attack. So these plans have been there for a long time, but they're no longer, of course, with the demise of the Soviet Union, they're not any longer part of the Cold War preparations. And the Bush people have expanded them to essentially include any kind of emergency, including climate, earthquakes, hurricanes, any sort of thing. And so all it requires is that there's some imminent danger to the government's ability to function. And if that's the case, then the president can simply assume a censorship and rule.
Well, let me ask you this. Doesn't the Federal Reserve, don't they have the power to prevent a shutdown? I mean, after all, if banks, for example, if they're too big to fail, then why not the federal government? Right.
That's the point that I've made, that if The Fed can, on its own authority, lend over $16 trillion to U.S. and European banks to prevent their failure. It can certainly lend money to the Treasury to prevent failure. So that is another possible response should nothing be worked out by October 17th. I think the Fed, there's no limit on the Fed's ability to create money, and there's no reason the Fed should not trust the ability to lend to the U.S. government, who can actually has a tax base to repay compared to a bank. If you can lend $16 trillion to the banks, you can lend to the Treasury. So that is another alternative. I don't know all of the implications of that. You could get into a situation where appropriations just cease to matter because the Fed creates the money, gives it to the Treasury, and they bypass Congress, and the executive branch spends it as it wishes. This could be one outcome. I don't really expect these things to happen because I think Congress wouldn't want to be shut out of the process.
Yeah, Congress is not going to want to be left out, but I think the big question is, how did we, as a free American citizens protected by the U.S. Constitution, how did we become one step closer to, or one step away, I should say, from a Caesar-like dictatorship?
Yeah, that is the interesting question. Of course, it's a historical process. It began with, what happens if we get nuked? How does the government continue? And so that's how it began, and that was a legitimate question. But under Bush, the whole thing, I think, was used essentially to create more power in the executive branch. The Republican Federalist Society, they push this point of the unitary executive. They have this claim that the president has powers that are not subject to congressional or judicial control, and that to exercise these powers, to act independently of the co-equal branches of government, they have used these executive orders, I think, to build in that possibility in an increasing way. So at some point, it might be tempting for somebody to essentially use that as a coup, as long as it had enough backing, either in the population or from the military. And so it is a danger. It's the real reason for these powers no longer really exists. We're not really worried about the Soviets nuking us. So,
yeah, so they're going to have to come up with some excuse, and there's a very good possibility that someday, like you were saying, they could very well use a debt crisis as an excuse to seize total power. Hey, we're about out of time. I want to ask you, what are some of the websites people can go to read your columns?
Well, it's just www.paulcraigroberts.org. And I think most of the columns appear on Prison Planet, on Alex's sites.
Well, fantastic.
They tend to reproduce them there.
All right. Fantastic. We're always glad to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.